What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. It builds meaning with each repetition. It builds momentum. It builds emotional weight. It creates a pattern. It anchors the story. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. Often when I'm coaching writers on their books, I'll land on a particular image that speaks to something larger in the book. I'm always excited to find this image because most times the writer put it there instinctively without being conscious of why it's there. And it's usually an image that speaks to the theme or something essential about the main character, and it gets at it indirectly. Now, sometimes an image is just description, and it doesn't carry any significant weight. For example, the windows suddenly went blind with rain, or the fireflies twinkled in the night air, or crickets sizzled in the dusk. So these on their own are beautiful images. They're dynamic and they give us a sensory experience. But then we have images that have a deeper relationship to the story. They're not just description. The image has more metaphorical reach, and that's what I want to unpack today. So before we dive in, what is an image? What do I mean by an image? Well, simply put, words paint a picture that creates a sensory experience for the reader, and that image is inserted into the story. An image pattern is an image that repeats, and it's loaded with meaning. So it gathers meaning throughout the story through repetition and variation. Now, an image that isn't repeated or isn't loaded is just description. It's incidental description. And some images are just meant to be descriptive. They don't carry any particular figurative meaning, and this is fine. Not every image needs to have deeper symbolic meaning. But in great writing, there is very little that can be classed as mere description. Nothing is random in a great story. And for more on description, listen to episode 141, 4 Guidelines to Writing Dazzling Description. Episode 141, I'll link in the show notes. So let's talk about image patterns. When I'm talking to writers I work with, I'll notice an image that feels symbolic and that might work as an image pattern. I'll see these opportunities in their manuscript with an image that they can bring back into the story. So they can load the image. By loading, I mean you add to and extend the meaning of the bare image. These are images that can be repeated. They can gather more meaning with each repetition, so they can carry the figurative meaning of the story. You can think of this as a motif. A motif is a repeated pattern, an image, a sound, a word, or a symbol that comes back again and again within a particular story. But it's spaced out just enough to give the reader time to forget about it before he sees it again and derives more meaning from it. So the meaning becomes layered. The reader's not consciously aware that this image is being orchestrated this way, but the reader does take it in. It's like in music. A motif is a small collection of notes that captures the essence of the piece. So this could be a riff or a lick or a phrase in music that we return to within the song. And it's a memorable passage of music within the piece, and it gives the song rhythm and continuity. Now, I always think of writing, especially during the revision process, as similar to composing music, because every song, every musical composition has a pattern, and so do stories. And the reader is always looking for patterns, not consciously, instinctively. They're searching for meaning whenever they turn to a story, and the way they derive meaning is through patterns. And a great way to create those patterns in story is through images or ideas that weave back into the story with deeper and deeper meaning. So the image or idea is loaded, it's extended. Now, many stories come to mind when I think of image patterns. Neil Gaiman's novel American Gods has the coin tricks. Margaret Atwood's novel Cat's Eye has the cat's eye marble. Catherine Harrison's memoir, The Kiss, has the symbol of eyes, this idea of being seen and, in her case, not seen. Bobby Mason's short story Shiloh has the log cabin. And Amy Hempel's story In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried has the image of the chimp. And each of these uses repetition and variation to create a pattern in the story. So let's talk about repetition and variation. Sometimes a strong image or word or idea will come into the story, let's say in the beginning, and then it will either be dropped from the story completely, or maybe it may be mentioned once or twice again early on, but then it'll be dropped for the rest of the story. Or it will be repeated, but without any variation or deepening disclosure. So it won't gather meaning and emotional weight. It'll be static. Now remember, the reader is always looking for patterns. It's an instinct. They're trying to derive meaning from your story. So they're looking for patterns, not static patterns. They want patterns that evolve and are layered with meaning. An image that repeats but doesn't have any variation, that doesn't gather deeper and deeper meaning, is just redundancy. It's fixed. Now, again, some images are just meant to be in the story once. It's a descriptive image. But an expanding image is one that balances repetition with variation. And that variation is in progressively deepening disclosure. It slowly gathers meaning from the succession of contexts it appears within the story, and it takes on a life of its own, and it supports the meaning of the story. This is great for writers looking for a way to give us the core of the story's meaning. An image pattern reveals now this aspect of it, now this aspect of it, in a sequence of sudden flashes throughout the book. And by the slow, uneven way in which it gathers meaning from the succession of context in which it occurs, it amplifies the story's meaning, and it reminds the reader what the story is all about. So let me give you some examples. A novel I talk to my clients a lot about is Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye. The cat's eye is the root image. So it's a marble that her older brother gave her when she was little, and she puts it in a jar with her other marbles, and she calls it a jar of light. Now, her brother grows up to become a physicist who studies light. Now, eventually, her brother dies. She loses the marble. And now the plot is not about her searching for and finding the lost marble. I mean, in the second half of the novel, we do see her searching for it, and she does find it at the end of the novel, but that's not what's driving the plot. But the marble is the root image that's woven throughout the novel, and it creates a pattern that accrues deeper meaning. Here's an excerpt from chapter 10. The cat's eyes are my favorites. If I win a new one, I wait until I'm by myself, then take it out and examine it, turning it over and over in the light. The cat's eyes really are like eyes, but not the eyes of cats. They're the eyes of something that isn't known but exists anyway, like the green eye of the radio, like the eyes of aliens from a distant planet. My favorite one is blue. I put it into my red plastic purse to keep it safe. I risk my other cat's eyes to be shot at, but not this one. Okay, so that's from chapter 10. And then she goes back to it in chapter 29. I keep my cat's eye in my pocket where I can hold onto it. It rests in my hand, valuable as a jewel, looking out through bone and cloth with its impartial gaze. And then again in chapter 33, she makes use of eyes again. She's referring to another character here, and she writes, her bad heart floats in her body like an eye, an evil eye. It sees me. So there's a lot of reference to eyes in the novel. It's not just the cat's eye, but she brings it back into the novel. At one point, they're having turkey dinner, and she's talking about the eyes of the dead turkey on the table. And here's another mention of the cat's eye from chapter 69. A marble, says my mother with a child's delight. Remember all those marbles Stephen used to collect? Yes, I say, but this one was mine. I look into it and see my entire life. Okay, so there's repetition and variation. The image is woven into the fabric of the novel, and it's loaded. Okay, one more example. This is from Amy Hempel's story in the cemetery where Al Jolson is buried. The central image is the chimp, and she mentions the chimp 3 times throughout the story, and each time it gathers more emotional weight. So I've talked about this story before. I'll give you some background. The narrator is with her dying friend in the hospital, and her friend tells her to tell her things that she won't mind forgetting. She says, make it useless stuff or skip it. So she tells her friend some useless stuff. And then her friend says, what else? Have you got something else? So she tells her this, she starts to tell her the story of the chimp. Did you know that when they taught the first chimp to talk, it lied? That when they asked her who did it on the desk, she signaled back the name of the janitor. And when they pressed her, she said she was sorry, that it was really the project director. But she was a mother, so I guess she had her reasons. Oh, that's good, she said. A parable. There's more about the chimp, I said, but it will break your heart. No thanks, she says, and scratches at her mask. Okay, so she introduces the chimp, but we can tell it's important. And then on page 4, her friend says, tell me about that chimp with the talking hands. What do they do when the thing ends and the chimp says, I don't want to go back to the zoo? When I don't say anything, she says, okay, tell me another animal story. So we get another animal story. Again, she's loading the idea, the image, and then more things happen. The friend expects the narrator to spend the night with her. The narrator cannot face it. And she leaves, disappointing her friend, and she feels weak and failed and guilty about not being able to stay, for not giving her friend the support she needed during her last days. And her friend eventually dies and is buried. And here's how she ends the story. She returns to the chimp. And this is on page 12. So we've already had it in the beginning of the story. And then we've had it on page 4. And now we're back to page 12, and she returns to it. I think of the chimp, the one with the talking hands. In the course of the experiment, that chimp had a baby. Imagine how her trainers must have thrilled when the mother, without prompting, began to sign to her newborn. Baby, drink milk. Baby, play ball. And when the baby died, the mother stood over the body, her wrinkled hands moving with animal grace, forming again and again the words, baby, come hug, baby, come hug, fluent now in the language of grief. So there's repetition and variation. It builds meaning with each repetition. It builds momentum. It builds emotional weight. It creates a pattern. It anchors the story. Now, readers read in a different way. They read from beginning to end. So they don't notice when this is happening, but they will instinctively feel that pattern. An image pattern can help organize you as the writer. It helps you organize your material. It helps you create content. Form can help you create content. So you load the repeated image with some kind of meaning. You load and control it. So you can attach the image to the main character in a significant way that generally has to do with that character's desire. Okay, let's recap. Point number 1, an image is made up of words that paint a picture and creates a sensory experience for the reader. Now, some images are solely for description. They're not insignificant, but they're not meant to have any thematic significance or special meaning to the character. Number 2, image patterns. Image patterns are when the image repeats and it's loaded with meaning. It's usually related to the character's significant history, something in their past, and their core desire. Number 3, repetition and variation. If an image is just repetition with no variation, let's say a sunset that you mention 3 times throughout the story, well, then it's just a static image. It's just redundancy, which you don't want. An image pattern is an image that weaves throughout your story with deepening disclosure. So there's repetition and variation. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. Now, this is an advanced technique, and it's what gives a novel, story, or memoir a sense of rhythm and cohesiveness. But the best way to practice this, first and foremost, is to start looking for image patterns in novels, memoir, and stories that you read. I would go in with a highlighter and look for where an idea or image is introduced and when it repeats. And then go back and see how that image or idea gathers meaning over the course of the story and in what variations it's put forth. And then look to your own stories for images that seem to represent a larger meaning, that seem to speak to something thematic, an image that represents something meaningful to your main character. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.